Last Thursday, Pope Francis wrote his first encyclical, or at least his first encyclical that he wrote entirely by himself. And it was on the environment. It's called Laudato Si, for our common home. And the focus of the encyclical is, a lot of people thought it was going to be about climate change. In fact, a lot of the early kind of pre-release drops of the encyclical hinted at his position. It was very clear that the Pope was going to side with the scientific consensus that climate change is a human-caused phenomenon. When you read the encyclical, it's not just about climate change, nor is it the case that the Pope is very interested in wading into the debate about whether the scientists are right or not. What he is interested in is articulating that the human relationship to the natural world is a moral issue. It's one of the deepest ethical issues of our time. And in this sense, it represents an expansion of the Church's ethical teachings to include the natural world. In environmental ethics, my field, one of the things that we often talk about is a term called Anthropocentrism, the human-centered valuing of things. And the Church's social and ethical teachings, while often viewed as progressive in some areas, conservative in others, are very human-centered. And so the idea that we would also include the natural world, or that the Pope would include the natural world, is a new thing within the Church's teachings. One of the big issues with global climate change is the difficulty that we've experienced since at least the Earth Summit of 1992 of reaching an international political consensus on how to address or implement constraints on our carbon pollution to ultimately lower the number of particles in the atmosphere that cause global warming. And the Pope also bemoans this fact. The encyclical, as far as I've read it, doesn't seem to map out an alternative that will rescue us from the impasses that have continued to occupy each one of those international conferences. But what the Pope does say is that the politics of needed to address environmental crisis are going to emphasize the needs of the local community. He mentions a Catholic political principle called the principle of subsidiarity, which defers political authority to the lowest possible or the least complicated political entity. And that message is consistent with our familiar environmental slogan, think locally, act, or think globally, act locally. And so the political actions that he has in mind are very local focused, that we need to live simply, and that means to live within our means that we can accomplish the best that we can at the localist level possible. I think the key takeaway in the significance of the document is that it represents an expansion of the Church's moral and social teaching to include our relation to the natural world.